So our speaker today is Melanie McManus. Melanie has worked as a news reporter at Green Bay radio station, as a press secretary at the Wisconsin State Capitol, and editor for 2 Madison publications. Since 1994, Melanie has worked as a freelance writer and editor, specializing in travel and fitness. She has won numerous awards for her writing, most notably prestigious the Lowell, Thomas Gold, and Grant Awards for her travel journalism. Her first book, which is out on the table outside, which she will be selling. She takes MasterCard, Visa, and checks. The 1,000-Miler is a memoir about her record-setting hike through the Ice Age National Scenic Trail. Please give a warm welcome to our next speaker, Melanie.
Thank you all for coming. I am so excited to be here. There's not much I love more than talking about the Ice Age Trail. So what I'm going to do first is tell you a little bit about the trail and our other national scenic trails. Then I'll talk a little bit about my hike, and then I'll wind up talking a little bit about my book. So I'm going to get started right away because there's just so much to talk about. So this is our Ice Age Trail. It's one of just 11 national scenic trails. And that, my friends, is a really big deal. In the entire United States, there are just 11 national scenic trails, including the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest, and we've got one of them here in Wisconsin. Not only that, but of those 11, only 3 of those national scenic trails are in just one state. The Ice Age Trail is one of them. That's just such a big deal, and a lot of people still don't know this trail exists. It's not completed yet, but one of my missions in life for the rest of my life is to get people to know that this trail is out here, to use it, and to help finish it, and I hope someday we become as proud of this trail as we are of our Packers and our cheese curds. So, yay, go Ice Age Trail. So, the trail is about 1,150 miles long. The western terminus is here in St. Croix Falls in Interstate State Park, which was Wisconsin's first state park to open in 1900. About 450 miles of the trail are in the northern tier. They're what I call the wildest and wooliest sections of the trail. These are the parts where sections where you'll find the most trail segments. They can be very remote. You'll feel like you're out in the wilderness in Montana or Wyoming or something like that. Oopsie. This is not my normal pointer. Here we go. So Antigo is right in here. The trail curves around Antigo and heads down here. I'll talk about this bubble later. The southernmost portion is in Janesville. This is Kettle Moraine State Forest through here. There's 2 miles right on Lake Michigan, and then the eastern terminus is in Potawatomi State Park in Sturgeon Bay. As I mentioned, the trail today is it's not completed, it's about 2/3 completed. However, you can still hike the whole thing. So how does that work? Well, all you have to do is when you finish a trail segment, say the next trail segment is 2 miles away, you just have to go by foot to the next trail segment. The road routes are not blazed like the trail is. However, the Ice Age Trail Alliance, which is basically the body in charge of the trail, they have suggested routes for walking. It's basically the fastest way to get from the end of one trail segment to the start of the other. So you can't, if you want to say I officially hiked all of the Ice Age Trail, you do have to go by foot. You can't go on bicycle in between if you want to say you officially hiked it. But you can hike the whole thing today. Oopsie, again. Got to figure this out. Top is forward. Okay, so as I said, one of 11 national scenic trails. Let's take a quick look at the other ones, just to see, first of all, where they are. Then I'll talk briefly about each one. This is the Pacific Crest Trail. This is Pacific Northwest. This is the Continental Divide. This is the Arizona Trail, another one of the 3 in one state. The Natchez Trace. Florida Trail, that's the 3rd of that's all in one state. Here's our Appalachian Trail. This is the Potomac Heritage Trail, the New England Trail, the North Country Trail, and our Ice Age Trail. So we have a nice representation across the entire U.S. Now to look at them quickly one by one, and the dates up on the top is the date they became a National Scenic Trail. So we have the Appalachian Trail, which is considered the granddaddy of America's long-distance hiking trails. It was not the first long-distance hiking trail. That was a not that long trail called the Long Trail in Vermont, which actually is about 275 miles, so it's not that long. But anyway, this was the second one developed, but it's considered the granddaddy. It's about 2,200 miles. It goes from Springer Mountain, Georgia in the south, oopsie, gall darn it, to Mount Katahdin in Maine. Here's a Pacific Crest, which a lot of you might have known about if you read the book Wild or saw the movie. 2,650 miles. It goes from Mexico to Canada through California, Oregon, and Washington. The Continental Divide Trail, 3,100 miles. It's on the Continental Divide, which is that landform where all the water to the east drains into the Atlantic, into the west, into the Pacific. Now those first three trails, the Appalachian Trail, also called the AT, they're all abbreviated, Pacific Crest, PCT, Continental Divide, CDT, those are considered our Triple Crown trails. So if you hike all three of those, you're considered a Triple Crown hiker. And in the hiking world, that's a big deal to become a Triple Crown hiker. Oopsie. Here's the North Country Trail, 4,600 miles. It's the longest by far of all the National Scenic Trails. Wisconsin, as you can see, has a little bit of the trail in the top above the Ice Age Trail. It's about 200 miles we have of the 4,600 miles. Florida Trail, depending which way you go around, there are two bubbles. It's 1,200 to 1,400 miles. I hiked this one in 2017. You start down here and you hike the first 3 days through Big Cypress Swamp, where you can see alligators and snakes, but luckily I did not. The Potomac Heritage Trail, it has something to do with George Washington was hoping in his day to have some water route that connected the Potomac with some other waterway, and this is a terrible picture. It's the only one I could find, but this trail is very much in development. So that's on the East Coast. It goes through Virginia, Pennsylvania, Maryland, DC area. Natchez Trace is another kind of an outlier among the National Scenic Trails. There's a Natchez Trace Parkway. The Natchez Trace, by the way, is considered America's first highway. It was basically a footpath that was used to transport people and soldiers in the South. It was in use from 1800 to 1820. So there's a parkway now where you can bicycle or drive your car, and it's 440 miles, and there's 62 miles of trail kind of separated along there with no plans to connect them. So that's very unusual for a National Scenic Trail. My husband and I did bike that, by the way. It's beautiful. Pacific Northwest Trail, 1,200 miles. A friend of mine hiked that and said there are almost no blazes on it. I don't know how you would hike that and not get lost, so that sounds interesting. And the Arizona Trail, I'm going to be hiking this one starting March 5th. At 800 miles, it goes from the border with Mexico to the border with Utah. It rolls right through the Grand Canyon, and water is an issue here, so I'm a little nervous about that. New England Trail, my husband and I hiked that one in 2017. We thought this will be so easy, or I thought, it's only 215 miles, but they don't believe in switchbacks there, so the trails go right up these mountains, and it's very rocky. So a lot of times you have like scree and stuff, and you're going downhill with your trekking poles, trying to brace yourself so you don't slip. So that was a tough little trail. So here's our big map again. It's very interesting today because if you look, you can hike all the way up the Pacific Crest into the Pacific Northwest. They're already talking about hooking into the North Country Trail. There's already legislation that's passed the House of Representatives before the Senate to extend this 40 miles into Vermont, where it would hook into that long trail I mentioned that goes down and would hook into the Appalachian Trail. There's already a different trail, not a National Scenic Trail, that hooks down into here, and this goes into Key West. So if that, you could potentially hike around almost the entire US. And if that happens, I would venture to guess somebody would connect it. And there's also some guy trying to create the Great Plains National Scenic Trail. So there's a lot of exciting possibilities for our National Scenic Trail system. And I compiled this just for you and my own interest because I started thinking about some things. So the National Scenic Trails, they pass through 31 states and DC, approximately 17,000 miles of trail today. And yay, Wisconsin, we're the only state with an entire National Scenic Trail and a portion of another. So we really have to, take advantage of these. It's great. We are so blessed. California has the most trail miles with 1,720, all the Pacific Crest, and we are second with 1,350. So we have a lot of National Scenic Trail in this state. We really need to be aware of it. And these are just some other numbers. Washington State is next with mileage in Virginia. So really, Wisconsin, Washington, Virginia, California, we're the leaders with National Scenic Trails. And Pennsylvania is the only state that has portions of 3 trails in it. So anyway, I still come back to go Wisconsin. Okay, so why do we have these National Scenic Trails? Well, it starts back to the turn of the last century with people like Teddy Roosevelt, John Muir. At that point in America's history, America was transitioning from an agricultural society to an industrialized society. And people like these two guys were saying, you know what, it's great that we're industrializing, but let's at least set aside our most beautiful, precious pieces of land. We can industrialize the rest, but let's not just do everything without thinking about it. So they started protecting pieces of land, and we started getting the National Park Service. It was created in the early 1920s. In the late 1800s, the first national park was created, Yellowstone. And so that was all good. We had a focus on protecting nature. And then kind of in the middle of the 20th century, a lot of research was coming out saying, guess what? Being outside is really good for you. It's good for you physically, and it's good for you mentally. We really need to be getting outside more. So then we had, getting a little ahead of myself, I'm so excited here. So we had Congress then was looking at different things, and President Lyndon B. Johnson in the 60s, and they decided, let's put together something called the National Trails System Act. And what we're going to say that can do is provide for the creation of 3 types of trails: National Scenic Trails, National Historic Trails, like the Pony Express Trail or Lewis and Clark Trail, and National Recreation Trails, which are trails that go through urban areas. And the basic idea behind that is if people and groups go out and create these trails, we'll save our best historic, scenic, and urban areas, protect them, and we'll also give Americans a way to enjoy them. Now, these paths aren't all necessarily hiking trails. Some of them are, you drive on them, but still, it's a way to get people outdoors as well. So Congress passed the National Trail System Act in 1968, and that's how that came about. So how did we get the idea for the Ice Age Trail? Well, it was this guy here, Ray Zillmer. Ray was born in the late 1800s. He was a lawyer in Milwaukee, so here he is as the Mr. Ray Zillmer, attorney at law, and his hobby was mountaineering and hiking. And so here Ray is as the hiker mountaineering guy. And he did everything from scale peaks in British Columbia and Canada. He and his son were the first to scale a peak in the Caribou Mountain Range. So there's a Mount Zillmer in British Columbia named after this guy. But he also liked regular hiking trails in England, for example, that are much easier. And he was very instrumental in helping start the trails in Kettle Moraine. And Ray also knew a lot about our glacial remains in Wisconsin. I always knew Wisconsin had a lot of glacial remains. My family's actually from Chicago, but we moved here when I was in 4th grade, and like the first thing I heard about was the glacier. But what I didn't know until I was researching this book is that Wisconsin has what are considered some of the finest glacial remains in the entire world. We have a lot of them, and the ones we have are in very good condition. So people that are into glacial geology come here, among other locations, to study the glacier. So that is phenomenal. So he knew about that. So Ray also had a lot of specific thoughts. He was watching the Appalachian Trail's development in the Pacific Crest, and he actually didn't like how they were being developed, because the thought behind those trails was, let's bring people up onto the mountaintops and keep them up there as long as we can before they need to resupply in a town, which is about a week. And then we'll dip them back down into a town. Then let's get them up on top of the mountain again, away from everyone. And he thought, well, that's kind of silly. He liked the trails in England that just rambled around the countryside, and if there was a town there, they just went through the town. And guess what? That was really convenient. It's lunchtime, I'm hungry, here's a town I can eat. It's dinner time, I'm hungry again, I'm tired, I want to stay somewhere, I can stay in an inn, I can have dinner, I can start hiking again the next day. He also thought it really connected the hikers with the people in the towns. It wasn't a situation where, who is this person with the backpack and the scruffy beard and that smells kind of bad coming in our town? You know, everyone knew who everyone else was. And it made it really easy to get on and off the trails. If all of your trails are on the top of mountaintops and only occasionally pass through a town, if you're trying to get on or off the trail, it becomes more difficult. And he also thought people should not have to drive more than a half a day to get somewhere awesome to recreate outside. And being in the Midwest, a lot of the national parks are being developed on the coast. And he saw, and this is again, he's thinking these thoughts in like the 30s, 40s, 50s before the interstate system. And he would see people from the Midwest just take all of their vacation driving somewhere and driving back, and that only would give them 2 or 3 days to get on a trail or something. So he had all these thoughts kind of going around in his head, and got to check my slide here. As I said, he knew about our glacial history, and he came up with the idea of the Ice Age National Park. Now notice I'm saying, and the slide says Ice Age National Park. So he had the idea of creating a national park along what's called the terminal moraine of the last glaciation. That's the hardest word to say, glaciation. So, and I'll talk about glacial history in a minute. But so that would be here. So picture this as a ribbon of land. So this is his idea for a park. You'd be able to do everything in this park that you did in other parks. You could camp, you could hunt, you could fish, you could hike, you could bike, bird watch, whatever. But just, it would be like this ribbon of land. And Ray died in 1960 before he could present his idea to Congress and the National Park Service. And so his buddies took up the cause, and they said, this idea is really stupid. Because a park is not a ribbon of land rolling all around the state. Like they said, how in the world could we administer that? What if we had all our weed whackers up at St. Croix Falls and the people in Janesville needed them? How are we going to be shuttling people and machinery around like that? There's no way. This is not an idea for a park. So they shot that down in the 1960s, and over that decade of the 60s, the people behind it changed the idea into that of a trail, and then the National Scenic Trail System Act was passed. So how did the Ice Age Trail become a National Scenic Trail? Well, you can't just approach Congress, which has to approve the trails and their routes, and say, hey, I've got an idea for a trail, and it's long. There's a minimal requirement of 100 miles long. For a National Scenic Trail. So you can't just say, here's my idea, it's more than 100 miles, so please give me National Scenic Trail status. You have to have something really important to America to get that designation, which is why we only have 11. So in the case of the Appalachian Trail, it's on the Appalachian Mountain Range, which is a major mountain range in North America. Pacific Crest runs along the Sierra Nevadas and Cascades, also major mountain ranges in the US. Continental Divide is on the Continental Divide, so you see where I'm going with this. And because the Ice Age Trail showcases our glacial remains, and that was the reason we were able to get it, because this is very unique. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Ice Age. It'll be very fun. It'll be a very quick overview. But to figure out a little bit about what this means here, this terminal moraine, the Ice Age was a 2.5 million year period of time. It was not all ice. It was, you might have, say, 100,000 years of ice, and then you might have 50,000 years of what they called a warming period, where all the ice was gone. Then all of that ice came back again. That 1 to 2 mile high glacier came back, and it might have been on Earth for 175,000 years, and then it all melted again. So this there were, I think, 5 warming periods during this 2.5 million year period. Some scientists say the Ice Age is still going on, and this is just one of those warming periods. If that's true, none of us will ever know, because the ice isn't going to come back in our lifetime, if it's even coming back. Who knows? But anyway, the very last time there was ice on the Earth was about 10 to 14,000 years ago. And during this, that's what today, when we say the Ice Age, most of us are really talking about that last portion of that 2.5 million years when there was ice in the earth. And during that period of time, scientists looked back and they saw, glaciers are always pushing and receding and pushing and receding. And there were 5 really big pushes that the glacier, and specifically this Laurentide ice sheet, which is the one over North America, there are 5 really big pushes that ice sheet made. And so they named them after the farthest south they got. So there's an Illinoisan phase, then there's a Kansan phase, there's a Nebraskan phase, and the very last time that ice sheet made a big push before it melted away for good, it got here into Wisconsin. That's the farthest south it got. So that last big push is called the Wisconsinan phase. Again, yay, Wisconsin. And this is how it got. And so here's where farthest the ice got. And this area here is all the driftless area. Maybe this is just me not knowing this, but I remember as soon as I heard the term driftless area when I came to Wisconsin, or when I was a little older, I always thought, I don't get that name. They're saying it's where the glacier was, and all I could think of was like snowdrift, and why are they calling this the driftless area? Well, all the kind of rubble and stuff that the glacier drags around is called glacial drift in geology speak. So therefore, this is the driftless area. So in case any of you are wondering, like I was, that's where it got that name. So yes, we have great glacial remains, enough to get the designation of a National Scenic Trail. Now I want to say a couple brief things about the Ice Age Trail and the Ice Age Trail Association and how it works. So the Ice Age Trail Alliance is the main group based in Cross Plains, Wisconsin, that builds, promotes, and maintains the trail. We get a little help from the Wisconsin DNR and the National Park Service, but the Ice Age Trail Alliance is really the main group. I call it kind of the queen bee of the organization, so that group does things like figure out where the trail's going to go in the areas where we don't have it yet. They get the funds to do it. They lobby Congress. They lobby the state governments. They make permanent easement agreements with private landowners to let the trail run through there. They're just doing all that big work. Then we have 21 volunteer chapters, and Gail Petrowski from the local chapter here is outside, and she, after the talk, if you're interested in seeing how you might get involved in the local level with the local chapter, you can talk to her. But they're what I call the worker bees. They do things like they go out in the spring and summer and they clip the trail, maintain it, they paint the blazes yellow. They hold things like guided hikes, snowshoe hikes, full moon hikes, whatever. So they do a lot of the hands-on work, but they're volunteer, and that's important to know, and I'll get back to that in a second. Chapters also often run hiking programs, so say you hike all the trail mileage in their chapter, you might get a patch or something like that. And this Ice Age Trail Org is a great website. They're one of the best, and I've gone on all the National Scenic Trail websites now because I'm trying to hike them all before I die. And this is a really very well done website. The trail does pass through 31 of our 72 counties, so it's very accessible. 60% of us live within 20 miles of the trail, and here you're close to so much trail. You are so lucky here. But I want to just say one more thing about the volunteer chapters. When I was preparing for my hike, I read and I knew that there were these volunteer chapters, but I didn't really think about what that would mean. And so my second or third day on the trail, I like to think it was because I was a little dehydrated and hangry, which is, when you're hungry and then you get angry. I remember walking through some section and there were wild raspberries up to my chest and I was getting all scratched up and I'm like, my gosh, this is not a National Scenic Trail. What a disgrace. In my head, I was thinking it was going to be this Disney-esque experience where everything is going to be perfectly clipped and mowed and every blaze is going to be perfectly square and perfectly painted because I just wasn't thinking. I just thought National Scenic Trail and all the pictures on the covers of these guidebooks are these beautiful pieces of trail. And of course, it was just because I was dehydrated, I'm sure, but I was kind of stomping around like, this is not a National Scenic Trail. And a day later, I ran into a volunteer and was talking to him, and I just started clicking in my head, well, of course, if this is maintained by volunteers and and a big storm comes through and your own home is full of sticks or whatever, logs down, it's a lot of work. And especially in the more remote sections of the trail, let's say you've got your little chapter is responsible for 50 miles of trail, and there's a blowdown in the middle, and you have to drive 45 minutes to get to the trail. You have to hike in 5 miles with a chainsaw over your shoulder. Then you have to saw the trees apart, and then you have to hike back out with that chainsaw on your shoulders, drive 45 minutes back home. I mean, it's a lot of work, and I'm sure we all of us in this room have done volunteering. We know what that's like. So that is not to say that the Ice Age Trail or any of these trails are a mess. Not at all. I would say, in my experience from hiking many, 85% of the trails are in fantastic condition, but you do have to be prepared that anything can happen. So if you're going to hike, my advice is look on the website, which usually has trail updates, or call the chapter chairs. They are not disturbed by calls, as I used to think. They love the trail. They're passionate about it. They will tell you things like, yes, we had a storm 2 days ago, and we know there's some trees down in the middle, or a beaver dam broke through, and if you hike on the grassy lake segment this weekend, you're going to be prepared to walk through water that's knee-high or whatever. Because, that's, and this is the way trails are everywhere. I will show you 2 quick slides. Sometimes they work as little videos, sometimes not, but this one here is the New England National Scenic Trail. I had come up here on this perfect trail and was faced with this, and there was a blaze up here. And you can't really see it from here, but these are rubbery, bushy things. And I was trying to just bash them down with my trekking poles, and I couldn't. And thank goodness my husband was with me, because I thought, I was trying to step on them, and they just weren't going down. And I said to my husband, you go ahead of me, and I'm going to hold your waist. And I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, and we just have to bash through this like a train. So that's what we did. And then this one here is the Florida National Scenic Trail. These might be hard to see too, but these are those kind of bottle brush things that are sort of trees, but sort of shrubs. And I had started hiking here at the very start of their hiking season. They had their maintenance crews out, but they just hadn't gotten here yet. And it was, again, a thing where you couldn't really step on these things because they were too big, but you couldn't walk around them, and you couldn't push them aside. And it took me forever to go from here to that wall. I think it took me half an hour. But that's just what happens. And again, very rare, but it can happen. So you have to be aware of that. Yes. Sorry, then. Okay, I always forget to mention the bifurcation. So here we go with that. That's this little bubble here. Why do we have that in our trail? Well, the trail traces the terminal moraine of the last glacier, which is where it stopped. And actually, the terminal moraine is right in the middle here. And when the people that were working on the Ice Age Trail were trying to figure out the exact route, and they came to that spot, one group, let's call them the East Siders, said, hey guys, we've got a great idea. Instead of the trail going along the terminal moraine in this little spot, let's bump it out to a little bit east of there, because then we can have the trail pass John Muir's boyhood home and Aldo Leopold's shack. And those 2 men were major 20th century environmentalists. Then the West Siders said, that's an awesome idea, but we've got an even better one. If you move it just to the west of the terminal moraine, we can take in the remnants of Glacial Lake, Wisconsin. Now, Glacial Lake, Wisconsin was a major portion of the glacial landscape, but it lay outside of the terminal moraine. What that lake was there was a river on the glacier. Part of the ice was coming. It hit into the Baraboo Hills, which is around Wisconsin Dells. They're the most ancient rocky outcrop in North America, 2.5 billion years old. So those 2 bumped together. They stopped that river up, and it backed up into Glacial Lake, Wisconsin. And that, scientists believe, is the size of 2 or 3 Lake Winnebagos, and that when the ice melted and that lake drained, it drained so quickly, in as little as 3 or 4 days, that the force of all of that water rushing out so quickly is what chiseled the Dells in Wisconsin Dells, the Dells Formation. So they said, we think hikers should go past the area that was covered by Glacial Lake, Wisconsin. That's a little more important. So the 2 sides were bickering. if you can imagine, people fighting. They were fighting. I'm right, I'm right, I'm right. And so they went to the National Park Service in Congress, which has to approve the route, and they said, you decide our fight. And the National Park Service was like, I'm not getting in the middle of this, or we're not getting in the middle of this. But what we will do to help you out is we will create a fourth class of trails for our National Trail System Act, which is official side trails. So you guys go back home, decide one side's the official side, one side's the official side trail. Well, guess what happened? The East Sider said, okay, great. Our side's the official trail, your side's the official side trail. And the West Sider said, oh no, you've got that backwards. We're the official trail, you're the official side trail. And they kept fighting. So finally they just called a truce. And today, if you want to say you've hiked the whole Ice Age Trail, you only have to hike one side or the other. They're both about the same. The east side's about 70 miles, the west side's about 80. Right now there's very little trail on either side. They're mostly road walks. So that's the story of our bifurcation. And I just talked to someone from the Ice Age Trail Alliance before I came here, and to see if there was ever any plans to make one side the official trail, and they said no, at this point, no. Oh, one other great thing, not that I'm high in Wisconsin, but I am. So the official, official national side trails, guess who got the first one? We did, because we made it from up to Timms Hill. So there's, the trail goes by Rib Lake, I think is where, and then there's like just a vertical 10-mile straight shoot up to Timms Hill Trail. And it's actually marked on there that this is an official side trail, and I think it even says the first in the nation, so yes. All right. Okay, so now why did I go on this, why did I hike this trail? So many people said, you're crazy, what are you thinking? Well, here's a quick background. A friend of mine, a runner, in 2007 decided to set what's called a fast packing record on the Ice Age Trail, or a speed record. He loved long distance running and was good at it, plus he loved the Ice Age Trail. And the Appalachian Trail, being the most famous of them all, had had many people set speed records on it. And so my friend Jason thought, well, if I set a speed record on the trail, number one, it would be fun, because I like to do that kind of stuff. And number two, I can bring attention to the Ice Age Trail, and I can help get it finished. So Jason did that in 2007. He went an amazing 47 miles a day. He did it in 22 days and 5 hours. I know, crazy. And I sort of knew he was doing that because I was on an email chain from our running group, but my son was graduating from high school going into college, and Jason was doing this in April, May, and I was just really busy with all that graduation stuff and didn't really pay attention. I knew he was running around the state, but I didn't know what he was doing. And then in 2009, I heard about the Camino de Santiago in Spain, and did a lot of travel writing, went over to Spain and just was amazed by this trail where you followed yellow arrows through the countryside, and I thought it was the most magical thing. And so I was writing about the trail all the time. I kept going back to Spain. I created a guidebook in English. And then one day in 2012, December 2012, I happened to be running with Jason and some other people, and he was reminiscing about his Ice Age Trail through hike, and he said, it's kind of like, I said, what was that? I'm sorry, I didn't really follow too closely when you were doing it. And he said, that's okay, it's kind of like that Camino you love. And I'm like, well, what? Tell me more. So he starts telling me about the Ice Age Trail, and my jaw just drops. I'm like, what? We have a nearly 1,200-mile trail that also has yellow arrows through the Wisconsin countryside in my own state, and I never heard of it, and I'm a travel writer, and I've been all over the state. I just couldn't believe it. So I went home that night. I think this is my slide here. I went home that night. I went on that Ice Age Trail Alliance website. I was still sweaty and gross from the run, and there's what they have called a list of 1,000-milers. And a 1,000-miler is anyone who has completed the whole trail, whether you've thru-hiked it or section hiked. Now, this is back in 2012, and I will also note that 2012 was kind of the start of a big hiking boom that's still continuing to this day in America and beyond. Hiking has just skyrocketed in popularity, but in 2012, it was right on the cusp of that boom. So I was looking and counting the people on this list. There were about 70-some people that had either thru-hiked or section hiked the whole thing, and I'm like, well, that's not very many at all. So then I was counting how many people have thru-hiked it. Of that 70-some, there were only like 20-ish, 22, I think, I was like, that's not many at all. And then I started looking at the names of the people who were the thru hikers. Male, male, male. And I was like, hoo-hoo, I could become the first woman to thru hike the Ice Age Trail, and that would be so cool. Did I mention I'm a little competitive? So I thought, oh, this would be awesome. Then I saw a woman's name, and it was like, Rats. And I thought, that's okay. Number 2 or number 3 woman to hike the Ice Age, thru hike the Ice Age Trail is really cool. Well, then there was a second woman's name and a third woman's name, and then the women's name stopped. And I'm like, oh, dang, I don't want to be the 4th woman to thru hike the trail. There's no glory in that. And then all of a sudden it was like, well, wait a minute. Those 3 women that hiked weren't trying to set a speed record. And even though I'm in my 50s now and I can't do 50 miles a day, which incidentally happens to be what most people, male or female, no matter the distance of a trail, whether it's the Pacific Crest at 2600 or the Ice Age Trail, 50 miles a day seems to be the sweet spot. I'm like, I can't do that, I'm too old. But I could do 30 miles a day, I think. And then I thought it would be kind of fun to say I set the speed record when I would be 52 at the time. And so I thought, I'm going to do that. But there's just one more problem. I have to work. I can't just take off. Even going 30 miles a day, it's going to take me 5 to 6 weeks. And then it's like, well, you're a freelance writer, and you've never heard of this trail. So if you've never heard of this trail, chances are Greater America hasn't. So sure enough, I started polling different editors all over the Midwest and nationwide, and I got a bunch of assignments. And so I'm like, okay, so now it's become work and fun, so I can go out and do this. So that was my plan. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I saw on the Ice Age Trail. First, I'll start with what did I take? Okay, so I did what my friend Jason suggested. I figured he was very successful. So I assembled what's called a crew. I had people with me every single day. They picked me up from where I stayed the night before, which is usually a friend's home or a motel or something, because I wanted to get a good night's sleep. I didn't want to be camping. They'd take me to the trail, we'd look at the map, we'd say, here's the next time or the first time the trail crosses a road. They'd go ahead in the car and either wait for me to get there, or sometimes they'd hike in to meet me. And then when I got to the car, if I needed more food or water or dry socks or dry shoes, Band-Aids, sunscreen, whatever, I would get it from them. And then we'd look at the map again and say, now meet me here. And so that's what we would do. At the end of the day, they'd take me off the trail. The next person would meet me the next morning. So that's how we did it. I had trekking poles. I like to point out some of these things. These are invaluable for many, many reasons, from not just protecting, say, your knees or your balance, but to seeing how deep water is and trying to get through those bushes that might be in your way. I love compression sleeves on your arms and calves. They're very lightweight but very warm. Yeah, I didn't know there was a lot of hunting till people told me about that. I mean, I know deer hunting, I knew that much, but man, people hunt a lot of things in the state. Squirrels was the first one I came across that I didn't know we did that here. My hydration pack, and yes, Buddy, the traveling bear. The Society of American Travel Writers that I belong to has this little program where you take this bear and he communicates with the classroom, kind of like the Flat Stanley, if you've ever heard of that. And so he was communicating with a classroom back in Sun Prairie. Okay, so here I started. Here's my thought again. I sometimes wonder what I was thinking all these years ago, thinking first of all that I was going to be on a Disney-esque trail. But my thought was I'm going to start in the western terminus. Back in 2012, everyone was starting from the east and going west, and I was doing the opposite because I thought, well, I'm starting the end of August, and I love the fall, and I love September, and I think I was thinking of the Septembers of my youth, which were usually like 50 or 60 degrees. And I thought I'll start in the north in St. Croix Falls because we all know it's always cold in northern Wisconsin, so it'll be nice and cool. And then I'll be in the northern tier in the beginning of September, and then as I head south where it's warmer, it'll be getting later in September. So by the time I hit Janesville, it's going to be late September, so it'll be cool there, and then of course it'll be cooler going back north. And I'll just watch all the leaves turn colors before my eyes, and it's going to be just the most wonderful experience in the world. So the first day, August 31st, 2013, in St. Croix Falls. This day, it got to be 95 degrees. And with about 90-some% humidity, I changed everything I wore, including my shoes, 3 times because the sweat was just pouring down my legs, running into my shoes. It was disgusting. That heat lasted about 10 days, 90s, every day. Then it was in the 80s for a couple weeks. Then the best I got was upper 70s. I think I had one day, I think the very last day it might have been highs in the 60s finally. But yes, it was miserably hot and humid, and I'm a Wisconsin girl. I love fall, I love winter, I'm waiting for snow. Hot, humid weather is not my thing, but I still had a phenomenal time because this trail is incredible. So, couple of quick things that I saw. I know I talk too much about this because I just love it so much, but there's a lot of different trail signage out there today. The Ice Age Trail Alliance, its goal over time is to standardize it, so you just have the yellow blaze, or you have their woolly mammoth official sign, which we'll see in a minute. But right now, they have signs that they got in the past that were inexpensive or free or whatever, just to get the trail signs. So here are some different signs you might see on the Ice Age Trail. This is an old fashioned official trail. The new one is coming up in another slide, I think. Here's our official Woolly Mammoth Trail. We have these wonderful signs here. I've not seen them yet on any of the other National Scenic Trails I've been on, but every trail segment has a name. Like this one's a dune segment, and you have these big signs at each end of the trail, which makes it easy when for logistic purposes, if you're looking at a map and trying to tell people where to pick you up or whatever. I'm hiking the dune segment, or I'm hiking whatever. Whereas other trails, you just have to go, I'm hiking from this dot to this dot. And often these trails or the roads don't even have names and stuff, so it can be difficult. So this is a very good help. There's a lot of different landscapes you will see on our Ice Age Trail. The very famous Appalachian Trail, everyone that hikes that will tell you it's a beautiful trail. It's definitely a beautiful trail, but it's a green tunnel. And that's actually in Bill Bryson's book too, The Green Tunnel. Now we do have some green tunnels of our own, but we have a lot of other things. We have a lot of prairie. That's one thing I really learned to appreciate hiking the Ice Age Trail. I never realized the beauty of our prairies until I was in so many different ones. It can't be overstated how beautiful those are. We have so many glacial lakes, especially in this part of the state, and they are just gorgeous. Again, on some of these other trails, you don't see water all that often, and when you do, it's like, oh my gosh, here's water. We have a lot of bodies of water on this trail, and it's just beautiful. Farm fields, this is not a good photo because, sorry, not my clicker. I keep getting mixed up. Okay. This was one of my favorite parts of the trail, and it's hard to appreciate the beauty here. I didn't know I was going to be writing a book or giving talks, of course, and the day was cloudy, so you can't do much about it. But on this piece of trail, you're in the woods, and you pop out, and you're on the top of this hill here, and the landowners that let the trail run through their land love the trail. And as you can see, they've mowed kind of a serpentine path, and they've edged it, let these little grasses go kind of knee-high. And the effect is, you come out on the top, and then you just feel like, I don't know, a bride walking down the aisle or a king or queen on the red carpet. It's just an amazing effect. We have a lot of pine forests. You don't always see that. We have trail 2 miles right on Lake Michigan. I'm very biased toward Lake Michigan because I grew up in Sheboygan, 7 blocks from the lake, so I love our Great Lakes. The only other National Scenic Trail that goes by the Great Lakes is the North Country Trail, so we're very fortunate there. And then our connecting road routes. I've heard some other hikers say, well, why would I want to hike that trail when it's not finished? Well, I'll tell you why. Well, the connecting road routes, almost all are on very quiet, scenic roads. You see beautiful farm landscape. One morning I was hiking and I heard clip-clopping, and then I heard singing, and then I heard bells, and I'm like, what is this? And a young boy, Amish boy, was coming in his cart just singing at the top of his lungs. I mean, it was just beautiful. And it's also, hiking a lot on rocks and roots can hurt your feet. So every once in a while, it seemed like whenever I was really like, this is bugging me, I want to get off, I'd be on a connecting road route. And then after a couple miles, when I'm like, this concrete's hurting my feet, or blacktop, then I'd be back in the woods. So I don't mind them. I mean, I do want the trail to be finished someday, but I would never let that stop anyone from hiking on our trail yet. Of course, you can see signs of the glacier. I won't go through all of these because I'm getting short on time, but I will tell you a couple of them. This here is what's called an erratic. Now, when that big ice sheet was moving across the landscape, it picks up everything from tiny pebbles to rocks like that, and then just dumps them wherever it feels like. So if you see, if a geologist would look at that and say, oh, this is whatever kind of rock, and that's usually found 500 miles from here, and it's never usually found here, you know that that's a glacial erratic. When I moved here in 4th grade and saw rocks in the woods everywhere, I just thought the woods had rocks in them. I came from Chicago. I mean, we were always in the city. So I thought that was typical. I didn't realize that those are glacial erratics, and so I think that is so cool. But my favorite feature that I learned to recognize was what's called an esker. So an esker is formed when you have the glacier and there's a river at the bottom, and then there's sludge that builds up at the bottom of rivers like it normally does. And when the ice melts away and the river flows away, that sludge is left, and it's a mound. And it's a mound like in the shape of a river, of course. When you talk about the glaciers and a mile or two of ice above your head, you know, you try and think, what is that like? How big is that? And you look up at the sky and go, well, I can't really, you know, how can you picture a mile or two above my head? But yeah, sure, it's big. But you don't really feel how big it is, or I didn't, until I climbed one of these eskers. These can be 60 feet tall. I don't know the tallest one in Wisconsin, but I know there's one at least 60 feet. And I remember climbing up one morning and just sweat pouring off, my heart hammering. I get to the top, and this doesn't really quite show how, they're pretty narrow on the top. It's not like falling off a cliff, but you wouldn't want to get to the side and just stumble because you could roll a long way down. But I got to the top of that, and it had taken me 20 or 30 minutes to get up the side. And again, heart hammering, sweating. And I finally thought, oh my gosh, I have some idea how massive those glaciers were, because a mile or two of ice, what is a river at the bottom to that mile or two of ice? It's a nothing. And what is the sludge at the bottom of that river? That's less than nothing. It's like a piece of, you know, grain of sand in an enormous sand dune. And yet here, it's taken me so long, and it's so hard to climb up this piece, that was what was nothing at the bottom of that glacier. And that was standing there, I could really get that sense of how powerful those glaciers must have been and how enormous they must have been. So I love eskers for that reason. And if you have a chance to look on the Ice Age Trail Alliance website or talk to Gail later or whatever, I'm not sure if there's an esker in this area. I know the Mondo esker, this was on the Mondo esker, which is by the Mondo flowage, so not super far from here, but go and climb one if you can. I mean, and just try to picture or think in your head what you're on and how little that was in the scheme of the glacier. There are a lot of just bizarre things you see. People would say to me, weren't you bored out there all the time by yourself? And I'd say, no, because I was seeing beautiful things, and then I saw a lot of funny and weird things. So I'll just do a quick little show through some of the different things I saw on the trail. I'm going to take one quick segue on this Kettle Bowl thing here. So there's a section in Langley County called the Kettle Bowl, and it is now well marked, but in 2012 it was not that well marked, and people were always getting lost and telling me they were getting lost because I was meeting hikers coming the other way. And in this particular segment, I had met with a chapter chair the night before. He showed me the sign and said, people think bears are eating it, but it's really porcupines like the salt in the stain, and that's why it's like that. So I'm hiking along, and you start out, if you're coming in from the west and you're in a ski trail, cross-country, double-tracked, it was really wide paths. I'm like, I don't know how these guys are getting lost in here, and this seems pretty easy to me. I see the sign in the middle of the woods, which is weird, because they're usually just at the beginnings of the segments, but it's the sign Joe had showed me, and so I'm taking pictures of it, and while I'm stopped, I'm eating a snack and just having a great time, and then I just start to walk on, and this catches my eye. And I'm like, that looks like the back of one of those little arrow signs. So I walk behind the sign, and it is, which means this is the trail. I'm supposed to turn here, and people coming from the other direction would see that arrow and know to get on the big ski trail I'm on. And the reason this was in the middle of the woods instead of just at the start and end was because it's going, hello, hello. You need to turn off this big wide trail you're on onto this little trail you're on. And I didn't even notice this till I was giving talks, because this is all chewed up. This is a blaze painted on here. So this is actually where the trail goes, and this is just can show you after summer growth and rains how these little, whatever they are, can just grow up, and it's hard to always know if people haven't been in to clip it. I also will say, before I scare anyone off, that now there's something called Mammoth Tracks, which is an app for your phone. It's a guidebook with a map. It wasn't available when I was there. If you have that, you will never get lost in the trail, because I used a version of that on the Florida Trail. And so when you turn on the map, you don't need to have cell service, you don't need to have Wi-Fi, it's GPS. When you turn this on, there's the trail in red, and you're a black arrow. So if you, say, are hiking and don't see a blaze and think, did I get off the trail? You just turn that on, and if your arrow is not on that line, it's off to the side, you know you're not there. So if I see the lines to the right of my arrow, I just turn, and the arrow goes, and then you just walk until the arrow lines up with the path, and then you go, oh, yeah, there's a blaze. So, but that's just something to show you how sometimes you have to keep your wits about you. And I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go through these really quickly. I apologize for that. I'm happy to talk about any of these. So I want to quickly, very briefly talk about my book. So yes, people had said to me, you know, right when I came off there, that was right when that book Wild was out. And raise your hand if you've read the book or know anything about it. Okay, so they kept telling me, oh my gosh, we've read this great book Wild about the PCT. You have to write one just like it. You are the Cheryl Strayed of the Ice Age Trail. And I'm like, well, I'll read the book. I don't know that I want to write one, but so the day I got off the trail, someone put that in my hand, and I start reading it, and it's like, whoa, I am not the Cheryl Strayed of the Ice Age Trail. I was not doing those kinds of things out there. And I'm like, no, I can't write a book. I mean, I had some funny things happen to me and some interesting things, but not enough for a book. But then a year later, I was really still obsessed with the trail, because being out in nature for that long is everything you've ever heard about, is everything people tell you about. It's so... we're not just relaxing, it's just we have so much stress in our lives that we don't even realize. And I don't mean the kind of stress like, oh, Christmas is coming, and it's everyday things like right now. Do I feel stressed? Absolutely not. But if I were out on that trail for a couple weeks and came in this room, I had this experience where I'd been hiking for a couple weeks, and I had to go into, have the doctor check my foot, and I walked into a Starbucks, and it was like, oh my gosh, you could just feel the tension in the air and the stress. And we don't realize that when we're in it. You can only feel that when you're not in it. And when all you have to worry about, they talk about how, you know, get rid of clutter, because clutter is stress-filled, you know, it makes you stressed out, and things make you stressed out. When all you have to worry about is walking and eating and sleeping, you just can't believe what that does for you. So I was obsessed a year later. I was telling everyone about the Ice Age Trail. And I woke up one morning and I just thought, I can write a book. I know what I'm going to do, because I had talked to all the people I met on the trail, which was just 5, but they all have very different stories of why they hiked it, how they hiked it, what it did for them. I had interviewed them all for these various articles I was writing. But I thought, you know, it would be really interesting to write my story as a thread of the carry through the book, but then weave in these people's stories to show people there's a lot of different ways to hike the trail. There's a lot of different reasons for hiking the trail. And I can put in some history, and I can put in Jason, my friend's story of his thru-hike, of his record-setting one, and I could put in the story of the first thru-hiker, if I could find him, because the Ice Age Trail Alliance had not been able to locate him. He's this guy here. I did find him. He hiked this trail in 1979 when it was almost, there were like 200 miles of trail, and the rest was all just, he was kind of on a reconnaissance mission, checking out the trail where the organizers were hoping to put it. And he's like a year older than me, so I think I was probably like in the disco in Sheboygan in 1979, and he's out here hiking this Ice Age Trail. So that was pretty cool. So I want to take questions, so I'm going to stop now. I'll just quickly show you. These are the real people that are in my book. I always like to see if people are real, what they look like. There's Jason, the record setter, on the left. Then there's a great warrior hike program getting combat veterans on the trail, because that's very therapeutic again. And I'll tell anyone who wants to know about DOTS later at outside if you're interested. So I did set the record. I broke it again 2 years later when I went back to hike it again for the book, and then a young lady broke my record and Jason's this year. So I would love to take questions.
Does anybody have any questions? All right.
All right.
I love hiking, but I hate wood ticks.
Ah.
How did you deal with that?
I went when there were no wood ticks. You know, funny you say that. The Ice Age Trail Alliance has a conference every year. You can go to one session of it or all 4 days, and I was told, go, there's a hiker panel for the people who hiked the year before. They'll give you good tips. So I went to it. This is April. My hike was planned to start the end of August. And again, Chicago parents, you know, I didn't even know what a tick was. I don't even think I heard the word until I was maybe 20. But this young man was talking about his hike in June and how he had sleeves of ticks, and he would brush them off like this. And then he stopped. He said they would just fill up again. So he just hike all day with them on him and take them off. So as he's talking, I'm just sweating, and I'm like, I'm calling all my editors. I'm canceling. I'm not doing this. And then somewhere in his talk, he said tick season is largely over by mid-July, and I was like, thank God. But I have started doing some hiking on the North Country Trail in sections, and I did do it during tick season. I put the permethrin on and have different clothing that like bug net kinds of stuff. I have had some on me, and it is gross. I haven't had any like in bed, but I think if you don't like them, just go when it's not tick season, you know.
I don't have a question, but I have a statement. I saw that one of my neighbors and our friend completed the trail, and we saw him this summer. He's in his early 90s, but he completed it when he was like 65, and his name is Salty Salt Cedar. And
I've seen that.
Do you know, did you ever meet him? Or
no, but I've seen his name on the list.
See his name, okay. Well, he was our neighbor, and he's our friend, and we saw him this summer, and he's in his early 90s, and he's doing well.
Yay.
Great. Melanie, do you have any questions in room 233?
Yes, they do.
Go ahead.
I was waiting for the mic. I got it now. My question is, if I were to say I went on a through hike, I would not think I would stop in the middle and go to a hotel and have a good meal and sleep overnight. I wouldn't think that a through. If you were to swim across Lake Michigan, would you stop every 2 hours to get on a boat, rest up, and then say that you... That's my question.
Yeah, you know, people have can have strong opinions as to what constitutes a through hike. I have had people say, well, I don't think you can say that if you didn't stay in a tent. And that's fair. I mean, everyone can, the official definition is just going, and completing it in one continuous hike. You're allowed to get off if you want or not. But yeah, I mean, if you feel that it's not a through hike to you unless you camp, that's fine. Go ahead and camp. My feeling more is we all have different reasons and things that resonate with us, and I just want people to get out on the trail. I just want them to use it, and if using it to you is, hiking just a mile, or hiking the easiest segment or an urban segment on paved path versus a really wild, woolly segment, that's fine. But just get out and use it.
Does anybody else have some questions in here? Anybody else?
That would be the difference between hiking and backpacking.
Yeah, or maybe...
Backpacking, this is me, and I'm going out and come back weeks later.
Right, and I have now, especially like in the swamp, I've done some backpacking and on the North Country Trail, and in Arizona, I'm going to have to backpack pretty much the whole thing just because it's hard to get off. And so I'm learning, I am learning right now how to be a backpacker camper, because I think I've only camped now overnight maybe 9 times. So yeah, there is a difference for sure. But I think both ways, do whatever you want to do at the time, or that some people aren't physically able to carry, a heavy pack. Yes? Question is, are animals, horses, or dogs allowed? Yes, on portions. I'm trying to think, though, horses, Maybe horses, I'm not 100% sure. I would think there would be some portions you could. I know people have gone with their dogs. Some have actually thru-hiked with a dog, at least one I know of, and I'm sure there are more.
Yep. Let's wait till I come to you or Melanie to take your questions so everybody can hear your wonderful questions because they're fabulous.
Are there any restrictions in sections as far as camping or campfires?
So camping is an interesting thing on the Ice Age Trail. On trails like the Appalachian Trail, they have shelters built roughly every 12 miles, which is what's considered a backpacking distance. The Ice Age Trail and some of the other National Scenic Trails are frantically building as many camp spots as they can. I'm not sure what we're up to now. I know at one point it was like 15 or 18. And there's a lot of places where you cannot camp, even if it's, say, a state forest, as opposed to the Pacific Crest Trail. What I'm told there, and I think in Arizona for the most part too, if it's public land, you can camp almost anywhere or have campfires almost anywhere, et cetera. But here it's a lot more limited. But we have a wonderful network of what are called trail angels. So if you call, say, you're going to be hiking in a certain chapters area, or call the Alliance and say, hey, I'm going to be hiking here. I'm hoping to camp. I don't see any camp facilities, but there's a campground 2 miles away. Could somebody shuttle me? People are often willing to do something like that to help you find a place. And I know people who have wanted to camp the whole trail have definitely been able to do it. It's just not quite as easy as some of the other trails.
Do we have any more questions? Here.
I have a simple one. What is the name of the app, that Mammoth app?
Mammoth Tracks. Mammoth Tracks, like footprints. And if you go to the Ice Age Alliance's website, they sell it there.
I lived in Arizona for 40 years, so camping in Arizona is finding water.
I know.
Backpacking, you have to know all the water things on your topo map, and it's interesting. Some places it's going to be tough.
I know. I'm already contacting their trail angels to cache water for me.
Are there any more questions? And this is going to be our last question because I want everybody to have opportunity to purchase a book outside or talk to Melanie in person, okay?
I know in Arizona when you're hiking there, you have to deal with things like possibly wild boars. But I was just wondering, have you ever had any unusual animal encounters in any of your hikes?
Well, funny you should say that. The place where I saw the most black bears was not the Ice Age Trail, it was the Florida Trail. I ran into them all the time, and I do have one quick funny story. So usually when I'd see the black bears, they'd see me, they just fly away. You know, it's like everyone tells you, they don't want to be near you. So on one of my times in Florida, I was finishing, it was like last day of a 3-week hike. I was getting off a trail. There was a mile access point to the visitor center where my car was. A storm was coming. Night was falling, and I had to leave the next morning at like 6 in the morning to catch my flight home. And I turn onto that access path, and I see not 1, not 2, but 3 bears, a mom and her cubs. And I'm terrified because I know that's the worst thing in the world. But even more terrifying is they're not moving. They're just standing there, and I know they can hear me and see me and smell me, and I'm saying things out loud and stuff, and they're just, meandering there, and I'm like, shoot, it must be because they know they're used to people because this visitor center is nearby, but I didn't know what to do, so I call a friend of mine. Now, why I called her, she's lived in Florida, but she was like 5 hours away in Florida, but just it seemed better to call her than someone else. And I'm like, Judy, there's a mother bear and cubs, and they're in front of me, and they're not moving, and I need to get home, and night is falling, and the storm is coming, and I don't know what to do. And she pauses and says, hang up the phone and dial 911. And I said, Judy, I can't call 911 and say I went for a hike in the woods and I see a bear, help me. And she paused again and said, but it's an emergency. And then I realized, oh wait, on my map it gave the number for this visitor center. So I call, but no one's answering because it's 4:50 p.m. and those places usually close at 4:30. So by now, the bears have meandered, not ran, into the woods. So I called Judy back and I said, okay, no one's at the visitor center. The bears are gone, but they just meandered off the path. I need to get walking, so just stay on the phone with me. And if you hear a scream, you hang up and call 911. So I'm walking, and I'm expecting her to start saying things like, remember the time in Madison when we did this and that? And instead I'm hearing, she's on her laptop. And then she says, if you see a black bear, you must fight back. Because there's a saying, like, if it's brown, lay down. If it's black, fight back. So she's like, do not play dead. You must fight. And I'm like, stop saying this. And she's saying all these things. And luckily, clearly I did make it past. The bears weren't there. But then I triumphantly went to my car, and then it was like, shoot, I am coming back here in 2 months, and I have to walk back up this path to continue the hike. But I did not have problems. But yes, it was funny because overall, I didn't really have any menacing experiences other than that black bear incident and what I think was a rabid groundhog when I hiked the Superior Hiking Trail this summer. I'll tell you guys about that outside if you're interested. It is pretty funny. Oh. You can use my mic.
Okay. It's working. Thank you. We want to thank you so much for coming and sharing your fabulous story.
Thanks for having me.
What a wonderful experience on a perfect day like today.
Yes.